Let's now turn attention to the war in the Middle East. Australia has announced it would resume funding to the United Nations Relief and Work Agency following steps to strengthen the integrity of the organization's operations. The agency's chief, Felipe Lazzarini, thanked the Australian government for their commitment to humanitarian principles and the plight of Palestinian refugees amid the unprecedented crisis in the region. Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong says a new agreement is being finalized for the country to resume $6 million in funding to UNRWA. In January, more than a dozen countries, including the US and UK, suspended funding to the refugee agency after Israel alleged that several of the agency's staff were involved in the October 7th attack. And lorries carrying humanitarian aid have entered the Gaza Strip via the Kerem Shalom crossing in Rafah. This comes as the European Parliament called on Israel to facilitate the delivery of supplies through all Gaza crossings amidst ongoing fighting in the area. Members of the European Parliament welcomed the opening of humanitarian corridors by sea to Gaza. They're also calling for an immediate and permanent ceasefire, as well as an unconditional release of all hostages held captive by Hamas in Gaza. Meanwhile, Hamas says it has submitted a new truce proposal to mediators in Egypt and Qatar that outlines its view on the prisoner swap. More updates now. At least 21 Palestinians have been killed and 150 others injured after Israeli forces opened fire on thousands of people waiting for aid in Gaza. It was the latest in a string of assaults on people desperately in need of food and other essentials. Early on Thursday, Israeli forces shot dead at least 6 Palestinians at the same distribution point at the Kuwait roundabout in Gaza. However, Israeli military has denied the claim its forces opened fire on crowds, but insisted that armed Palestinians were responsible for the attack, adding that the military was reviewing the incident. But the U.S. National Security Council has welcomed the appointment of a new Palestinian Prime Minister. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas appointed Mohammed Mustafa as the new Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority. A statement by the U.S. National Security Council partly reads, quote, "The U.S. will be looking for this new government to deliver on policies and implementation of credible and far-reaching reforms. A reformed Palestinian Authority is essential to delivering results for the Palestinian people and establishing the conditions for stability in both the West Bank and Gaza," end quote. Prime Minister Mustafa's appointment comes amid mounting pressure to reform the governing body of the occupied Palestinian territory. He has been assigned to lead the relief and rebuilding of Gaza and reform the institutions of the Palestinian Authority. Meanwhile, U.S. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is calling for a new election in Israel, emphasizing it is the only way to allow for a healthy and open decision-making process about the future of Israel. During an address in Washington, D.C., the Jewish American Democrat said many had lost confidence in the vision and direction of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He asked that the U.S. cannot dictate the outcome of the election, as it is up to the Israeli public to decide.
I believe a new election is the only way to allow for a healthy and open decision-making process about the future of Israel, at a time when so many Israelis have lost their confidence in the vision and direction of their government. I also believe a majority of the Israeli public will recognize the need for change, and I believe that holding a new election, once the war starts to wind down, would give Israelis an opportunity to express their vision for the post-war future. Of course, the United States cannot dictate the outcome of an election, nor should we try. That is for the Israeli public to decide. A public that I believe understands better than anybody that Israel cannot hope to succeed as a pariah opposed by the rest of the world.
Well, let's get in more updates on these latest developments from the region. The Voice of America's Ricky Rosen joins us live from Tel Aviv. Ricky, I'll engage you just a moment about U.S. Senate Majority Leader's position. But I mean, a lot has happened in the past 24 hours. Let's begin with that. What are you hearing? What's the updates from the region?
Well, besides, as you described, the tragic incident in Gaza, where where over 20 people were killed in the aid delivery, there is a lot of discussion about the possibility of a new hostage deal. There were hopes that a hostage deal would be announced before the start of Ramadan, which did not happen. And now there are reports that Hamas has released a list of 1,000 prisoners in Israeli jails that they want freed in exchange for the release of 40 hostages. Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, is calling the Hamas demands ridiculous, but has agreed to send negotiators back to the table to discuss some of these latest developments and hopefully come up with a deal.
And Ricky, we also understand that Israeli Prime Minister met with relatives of 22 captives believed to be held in Gaza. Talk to us from that window. How did that meeting pan out?
Well, it was a month and a half since Netanyahu met with the families of the hostages, and they had grown increasingly desperate to get firsthand news from him and from the war cabinet, so that they were camping out in tents in front of his house and in front of the defense ministry. So they finally met with him, but they didn't get any certain news. As I said, there are reports that a hostage deal may be on the horizon. Prime Minister Netanyahu shared with them that he had pressured the Qataris, who it's rumored that the Qataris threatened Hamas leaders that they would expel them from their luxury accommodations in Qatar if they didn't agree to a hostage deal and ceasefire and humanitarian aid delivery.
I mean, let's stay with the relatives of those who are in captivity. Do you think they have trust and confidence in the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, to bring back their loved ones and families still held in captivity?
I think that there's a growing movement, including many of the hostage families, although they are trying to keep it as a non-partisan, non-political issue, the release of the hostages. But there is a growing movement in the Israeli public with more and more people going out into the streets and demonstrating against Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government. Many feel that his actions in the war and in the government in general are based on his own political survival more than the good of the country. For example, hundreds of thousands of reserve soldiers, including some of the families of the hostages who were called up to fight in the Gaza war, are protesting government's attempts to satisfy the religious parties in his coalition who refused to let their young men be drafted into the army, and who threatened to bring down the government if he forces them to be drafted.
And we're getting feelers that Hezbollah is sounding the alarm of battling Israel. I mean, its leader just some hours ago, Hassan Nasrallah, has vowed to continue the fight against Israel. In fact, he says the Israeli military has been secretive about the losses in the north. You have eyes and ears on the ground. Is Israel really losing the war in the north of the enclave?
The Israeli military says that Nasrallah's claims are a kind of psychological warfare. In fact, they have admitted that 10 Israeli soldiers and 7 civilians have been killed by Hezbollah strikes, while Israeli strikes into Lebanon have killed over about 250 Hezbollah fighters. But it has, while there haven't been a lot of casualties, it has created a very intensive disruption in the life of Israeli residents of the north. 80,000 have been evacuated, and there's no understanding of when they might be able to return to their houses, because there are almost daily bombardments of airstrikes and missiles coming from Hezbollah.
I mean, let's check out U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer's position calling for new elections in Israel. I wonder what you make of that particular calls and demands.
I think even for the Israelis who would like to see elections and the end of Netanyahu's extremist right-wing government, for example, Benny Gantz, who is one of the leaders of the opposition, even though he's sitting temporarily in the war cabinet, even he had a negative reaction to Schumer's speech in the Senate, because it's seen as interference in the internal affairs of a democratic country. But many analysts, Israeli analysts, point to the speech as a sign that the Biden administration is reaching a breaking point in dealing with Netanyahu, who has been ignoring or opposing almost all of the American demands regarding the war in Gaza, the future after the war in Gaza, and the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians. There is even talk that the U.S. might stop vetoing UN Security Council resolutions and ceasefire demands, and even put conditions on continuing the military aid that it's sending to Israel. And Senator Schumer's speech was a sign of what might be in the future.
I mean, speaking of bilateral ties and diplomatic relations between Israel and the U.S. as well, Joe Biden had threatened that if Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu goes ahead with the offensive in Rafah, then he would have crossed the red line. Any updates on that?
They still haven't gone full force into Rafah. They're talking about all kinds of plans beforehand of establishing humanitarian islands in the central part of Gaza, that people who've been displaced to the south, to Rafah, could be then moved back up north. But all these things are many weeks away, if not months. And meanwhile, Prime Minister Netanyahu claims that he intends to go ahead with the full-scale invasion of Rafah. It remains to be seen whether Biden will allow him to do that, and whether the army is prepared to take such an extreme action.
And of course, just before I let you go, allow me to squeeze in this question, because there is a new sheriff in town. We're talking of the Prime Minister, the new Palestinian Prime Minister, Mustafa, who was only appointed, Mohammed Mustafa was only appointed, a few hours ago. What does this bring to the table in terms of the war?
I don't know if I'd call him a sheriff, because he is more of a sort of mild-mannered economist. And they're hoping that he is enough of a technocrat with faith in his economic vision for reviving the economy in the Palestinian territories. But they're not at all sure that he, as an ally of Mahmoud Abbas, who is extremely unpopular, whether the new prime minister would really get the faith or confidence of the Palestinian public.
Well, Ricky, conditions, we understand, remain dire in the region. The struggle for survival continues: food, shelter, water, and basic essentials generally. And we hope that indeed in the nearest future we can possibly see a ceasefire, especially with the start of the holy month of Ramadan. But most kindly, viewer is Ricky Rosen, live for us in Tel Aviv.
Thank you.